አዲስ ቅኝት መቀመጫውን ቶሮንቶ ካናዳ ያደረገ የሚዲያ አገልግሎት ነው። ዝግጅቶቻችንን በአዲስ ቅኝት ዌብሳይት www.addisperspective.com እና በአዲስ ቅኝት ዩቲዩብ ቻናል እንዲሁም ዘወትር እሁድ ከ4 እስከ 6 ፒኤም በአይሃርት ሬዲዮ በቀጥታ የሬዲዮ ስርጭት መሰናዷችንን እንድትከታተሉ እንጋብዛለን። አዲስ ቅኝት የሚዲያ አገልግሎት።
I'm in awe of the design of the forest, in awe of the magnitude of it, its eternal ability to replicate itself.
Hello and welcome to this edition of our program. We have Kevin McMahon, a great Canadian filmmaker, director and writer. Recently, Kevin's new film, The Boreals, is released. It's a magnificent nature's tale.
Of it, its eternal ability to replicate itself.
By the way, guys, tell us about a little bit who Kevin is.
Kevin is a friend. Kevin is a human being. He is kind, he is very generous, but at the same time he is very serious, and he shows you whatever you ask him, whatever he can. He understands people very deeply, like he understands the nature. So there is nothing, small for Kevin. He is very focused. He gives attention to details, and he is a person who gives whatever he has, and whatever he knows. He generously. I can say he is my mentor. And as you know, my first film for CBC, that's Zita, was produced by Primitive Entertainment. So, as you know, he is a great director, and he produced more than 20 films and dozens of hours of non-fiction television. In his main focus is environment in this climate crisis age. He tried to understand, he tried to, depict what's going on behind nature. He is a very humorous director and writer. I love one of his films, short films called Canadian Famous. And it's a very comparative tale of what a Canadian celebrity looks like. So he writes a lot, he produces a lot, he thinks a lot, and he is very concerned about science and nature. And recently he made another masterpiece of his nature-based documentary, and which is released recently. Called the Boreal.
Was a community.
These trees are communicating. We're not alone in this experience.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Kevin. Are you Primitive now?
No, I am at my cabin. I've been here for almost for most of the pandemic. Here, maybe this light will be better if I do this. I've been here for most of the pandemic, just shielding.
Yeah.
It's been nice.
So is it up north?
Yeah. It's about 2 hours north of Toronto.
So is it colder than Toronto, or is it Toronto is warmer these days?
Yeah. If you see behind me, it's colder and much more snowy.
You like the cold weather, I know, and you are, the lover of the cold weather.
I do. It's lovely here, though. When the pandemic is over and the weather is nice, I'll have you and your family for a visit. You'd like it.
I hope so. And what?
The Boreal forest region is one of the last regions in this world where nature dominates.
Some of us have heard them sing. Within that moment, the environment was a community.
These trees are communicating. We're not alone in this experience.
I'm very proud of you. Thank you. You know, I'm so happy to see the Boreals was launched finally, and congratulations once again about.
Thanks. Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. We the whole family saw it together when it was broadcasted on TVO the first day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's amazing. And you know, today I want to ask you some questions about your professional journey and about your life. I know that you are from Niagara Falls, and you are a special guest for our virtual conversation. You are dedicated, you know, making environmental films and environmental themes. What is the reason behind that? First, being born and raised in Niagara Falls has something to do with your being a filmmaker, or?
I think so. Thank you firstly for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here. I would say being in Niagara Falls, being from Niagara Falls, definitely had an influence on me being a filmmaker for a couple of reasons. One, because I was exposed from a young age to a really powerful wilderness that I found really fascinating because of the falls and the river. And when I was young, we used to go down into the gorge around the river and explore down there. But I was also exposed to show business because there's all that, all those attractions and all those kind of crazy places around Niagara Falls. So I always had both those interests. And as you probably know, the first documentary that Michael, my brother, and we have a company together, the first documentary that we ever made was about Niagara Falls.
The Falls. The Falls.
The Falls.
Yeah.
It's called The Falls. And it's about the culture and the history and also the environmental problems down there. So yeah, somehow those things all influenced me. That was a long time ago. That was almost 30 years ago. Yeah. And since then, most of the films I've done have, not all, but most have something to do with environment.
Yes, so I know you directed, and produced more than 20 films, and you were awarded so many awards. And why you specially focuses on environment, but you still stick with the environmental issue?
Well, as you know, yes, I produced different films on different subjects, including the wonderful film Kizika. So I have lots of interests, but to answer your question, I started out as a journalist, as a reporter. Yeah. And for me, as a reporter, you're always looking for what's the big story, what's the story that really matters, that's really important to people, that people really should know about. And for me, the environment has always been the biggest story because it wraps around everything else, whether it's questions about human rights, questions about different cultures or different races or different societies. All the conflicts that humans have make up a lot of journalism. Yeah. But for me, an important and I think until very recently neglected part of journalism was to look away from us and the way we interact and look out to the world and see the way we interact with the rest of the world, which is what keeps us alive. Mm. So for me, that's why it is been so compelling, because they're important stories and they're interesting stories. Every environmental story is a story that has a lot of scale and a lot of complexity, and usually something in some way funny, because it's ironic. Usually humans go and try and take one thing out of the environment and they have a different impact than what they expect. Mm-hmm. So I always find them really interesting stories to tell.
Let me ask you about the Boreal, the new film that you made recently. What was the inspiration behind to make this film? Is there any special reason to make it?
Well, there was a moment when I decided to make it. More than 10 years ago, I was working on another project, which was about Canada's national parks.
Yeah.
And we were filming up on the Nahanni River, and it slid all the way down to the bottom of the river. And it was all jumbled up at the bottom of the river. But it was trees and moss and dirt, and you could see animals' nests, and it was all one piece. And I thought, it's amazing. This is just like one unit that had slid down the river. And it made me realize this isn't just trees. This is one connected thing. And I started asking the guides about the forest, that particular boreal forest, because it's different from the forest we have, say, around Toronto or in southern Canada. So I started learning about it, and I became fascinated by it and decided to try and make a film. But it took a very long time to make the film, because the film is about trees, and most people that you would ask to make money, to give you money for a movie, think that's boring.
You're listening at Diskenyet's Art and Entertainment. We're having an artistic conversation with Kevin McMahon, the great Canadian writer and director. Enjoy our program.
But the outcome is as you expected. People receive it very well.
The outcome is as I expected. I'm happy with the film. I'm proud of the film. I think we worked very hard on it, and I think we did a nice job, and I feel good about the film, and people who have seen it have liked it a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy about that. And the outcome is as I expected also, in that it has not gotten very much attention, because it's about trees. And a movie that was about people fighting would get more attention. Whatever. And we're in a pandemic.
This maybe because it's during the pandemic. Other than that, it's a very great idea. Let me read you this. I took it from the film. The young trees, they are taking a lot of carbon to grow, because the small trees, they need to grow a lot, because otherwise they will just not survive. There is a huge competition inside the young forest. And this strikes me. I thought it's a competition is something human. Are trees competing each other? Are they fighting each other to survive?
Sure. Yes, they, like humans, like all animals, they are both competing and cooperating, because, of course, as the trees grow, they cast a shadow on smaller trees.
Yes.
And if you have a shadow, then you have no food if you're a tree, because your food is sunlight.
Yes.
So there is a competition in the forest, but we also have learned fairly recently, there's now scientific evidence that talks about the cooperation among trees. There's a woman at the University of British Columbia named Suzanne Simard, and she is a pioneer in doing research about how trees communicate. So she's used various experiments to show that trees can pass information back and forth, and they also pass food. So in the autumn, when the trees, the deciduous trees are losing their leaves, a lot of their energy flows to the evergreen trees underground through the root. And in the spring, the energy flows back from the evergreen trees into the deciduous trees. So they're actually sharing food as a way to get by. So there's a competition and a cooperation always going on.
Unbelievable. I remember when I was in Ethiopia, there is this tree, eucalyptus tree. I think it's originally from Australia. And 100 years back, they imported the eucalyptus tree to get, fuel, because it's growing fast. But through time, it's like a colonizer, it takes everything from the surrounding, native trees, and the native trees, the pines, are getting smaller and smaller. And when the city decided to establish a botanical garden, the first thing they did was they cut out all the eucalyptus tree from the forest. You know what happened? The other trees, the pines, are coming out and flourish after 100 years. So amazing. That's really amazing. I never think it. When I see this line in your film, it touches me. Are plants still, living like humans? So this is an amazing finding, So how do you compare it, with the human experience and the forest?
Well, trees do migrate. Now, there is a whole school of botany that looks at tree migration. And in Borealis, we show that migration because we go up to the Arctic, to the near Arctic around Hudson's Bay with indigenous people. And there you can see little trees start growing up, just little, like they're spruce trees, but they're this big. They're moving north because they're getting more carbon. And of course, plants are invasive and plants will take over, just like the eucalyptus trees in Ethiopia. Plants will invade each other's space. There are, I recently was in Niagara, and I was at a historic home, a site where a famous Canadian had lived like 300 years ago. And there were these trees. What kind of tree were they? I forget what the kind of tree was, but they had seed pods on the ground. And I picked up a seed pod and I thought, we'll try and grow these. We'll grow one by our cabin, or we'll grow one in Toronto. And when I read up about them, I found out that these trees, through their roots, they spread a kind of poison underground to keep other trees from getting too close to them. So, I think there are more similarities between humans and plants, just like there are more similarities between humans and animals than we would like to admit. About half of our genome is also found in a spruce tree. So the difference between us and them is not as big as we think it is.
Unbelievable. Do you think that during the pandemic, the environment and the plants are getting more chance to revive and to be more green and,
Seems to be. I've been hearing a lot of stories about coyotes in Toronto. People are seeing coyotes all over the place in Toronto. And now we've always had coyotes in Toronto on the outskirts, but now people are seeing them in the neighborhoods. I saw something on social media the other day where a person was talking about a fox in downtown Toronto, which is something you don't see very often. So everywhere, wildlife is flourishing, and I'm sure the plants to a certain extent are as well. Whenever humans go away, nature will come in and fill that space.
So it's a kind of blessing in disguise.
I think it's a blessing for anything that's not human. It's certainly a blessing for coronavirus. Look how well it's doing.
Kevin, I know that you made a lot of films other than environmental issues. One film that I still remember is Marshall McLuhan, and it's a great movie. I want you to tell me about that because it's a masterpiece. And the other movie I like is Famous, the short one. I always watch it,
I like that movie too. That may be my favorite. It's only 7 minutes long.
Is it a feature or a documentary? How do you label it? When I see it,
Canadian Fame.
Famous, yes, Canadian film.
It's a documentary. I mean, even though, so for your viewers, It's a 7-minute movie about a famous Canadian actor who, when he goes out on the street, nobody recognizes him, even though he's been in, I think he was a star in 3 different television series. So it's about what it means to be famous in Canada. But for that movie, he came up with the idea, we should just go around and ask people if they know who I am. Yeah. And so we did that. We just spent a few days going all over the city asking people, and nobody knew who he was. And then they would go, "Oh yeah, you're that guy." So yeah, no, that was, for me, it was a wonderful movie to make because it captured the challenge of trying to make a living in the arts in Canada when you're beside the American empire, which is so big and so noisy that we cannot make our voices heard very easily.
Amazing. You know what? That's the question is, you decide to make environmental film and non-commercial film. In Canada, it's not easy to become a filmmaker and to make your living. And that's what I learned in that short movie of yours. So how do you explain this contradiction?
It's true, it is a contradiction. When I first started to make documentaries, I started out as a newspaper reporter. My first job was a newspaper reporter. I worked for 5 years at a daily newspaper covering everything from meetings to all kinds of different stories. Yeah. And when I wanted to go into TV and film, because this was almost 40 years ago and newspapers were already starting to decline. Yeah. And I thought, I want to be in the newer technology. I want to be in a younger kind of business. So that's why I went into TV and film. At the time that I went into it, there was still a lot of public television. And there was, so there was the idea that, well, maybe I'll work for the CBC, or maybe I'll work for TV Ontario or PBS, or one of these public networks that did a lot of documentaries. But over time, because that was also, when I started this, it was the beginning of what we call neoliberalism, small government, governments getting out of funding the arts. So all those things started to go down. So we had to compete with a show business environment. We had to try and find a way to survive in a show business environment. So it has been frustrating, obviously, at times. It has been, and you're right, there's an inherent contradiction, because in movies or television, creators usually tell people whatever it is they want to hear. And in documentaries, you always are telling people things that they do not want to hear. So it's a challenge. Yeah. But, people are curious. So there is always a market for it. And we find that, young people seek out documentaries. Documentary festivals did not exist when I first started. There was nothing like Hot Docs or Infra or even the Toronto Film Festival had only started and it didn't do documentaries. So I think, even though there seems to be a contradiction, in the same way that people have bought newspapers for a long time or watch television news, they want to watch documentaries. People want to learn. So even though we don't make as much money and we don't get famous and we don't, have all the perks that people that work in drama do, we get to do something that will last and that we're proud of.
Interesting. Yeah. Why is the view about being a femme in US and in Canada is different, as you try to show us in that short movie?
I think it's partly that. The cultures are different. They don't look different superficially, but they actually are quite different emotionally in the way people feel about their place in society. In America, everything is individualism. Me. It's about me. I'm the star. I'm the entertainer. I'm the one everybody should look at. That's how their society has been constructed. Whereas in Canada, it's about, let's all get along and nobody's too special. Nobody should think that they're much better than anybody else. So so there's a cultural difference. And then, of course, there's just when you're a small country beside a very big country, you feel, I don't know, I mean, you always are looking to them because they seem to be the example for everything. So Canadians are never as confident in the things that they create as, in my opinion, they should be, because they feel that they are less compared to Americans. I'm sure that I don't know what the relevant dynamic would be in Africa. Like I know Kenya is a powerful country. Ethiopia is a powerful country. Perhaps other smaller countries look at it that way, or, it'd be the way the small country looks at Germany, or the way the Finns look at Russia. There are these dynamics everywhere. If you are the little guy beside a big guy, the big guy is gonna, you're gonna look up to the big guy. Even if you don't like him, even if you resent him, you're still gonna look up to him.
You grow up in Niagara Falls, where the U.S. and Canada border is, and you're born in the U.S. Niagara Falls, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But only by accident, because my mother worked in the hospital there.
Oh.
But I only lived in Canada.
So, but do you feel those values in you? I mean, being in two nations and being a Canadian, or just you're Canadian?
I would say I feel very Canadian. I'm absolutely Canadian, and I'm sort of a chauvinistic Canadian, at least compared to Americans.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I would say, because I grew up on a border, and because it's a place that is a real mix, on the one hand, it's extremely wild, and on the other hand, it's extremely commercial and kind of paved over. So all of those things gave me a real sense of border, of being in a marginal place, or being, in between things. And so I'm comfortable with being in marginal places and with uncertainty, which, of course, as you know, as any kind of an independent media maker, we have to be very comfortable with uncertainty.
You're listening at Disconnects Art and Entertainment. We're having an artistic conversation with Kevin McMahon, the great Canadian writer and director. Enjoy our program.
Yeah, we're always uncertain about everything. That's unfortunate, but sometimes it could be the way of creativity. I think it gives you trigger, to create new things always, because you are not certain.
Absolutely, and I think it makes also, it has the benefit of making life bearable when it is uncertain, like now. Yeah. I think it's easier for us to live with something like a pandemic, because we're very used to not being able to plan our future. Maybe I'll make a movie, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll be away for months shooting, maybe I won't. Maybe we'll have money next year, maybe we won't. So I think we are used to living that way. And so it gives you a certain resilience. That's the benefit of it. There's a lot of bad sides, but it does have a couple of good sides.
What is the filmmaking is like during the pandemic? Do you think is it doing good, or is dead? Some industries are.
It's not dead, but it's not doing good. We actually have managed to shoot a film. My friend Alan Swag, who
yes,
managed to shoot a film during the pandemic, and we are now editing it, because Alan's films are based entirely on interviews. So it was fine. He interviewed people over Zoom mostly, and it worked fine, and so he's got a film out of it. I have a couple of projects that I want to start. that we have money for. We have several projects actually in the company that we have money for, but we can't do them because they all involve travel. They involve going to other places. In my case, I have a film set up to go to the Arctic, but I can't go to the Arctic because they don't want us to go from the city to the villages. So I think it's pretty challenging. Any kind of work, whether it's being a filmmaker or being the guy who picks up the trash cans, any work that insists that you be out in the world is hard right now.
Yeah. But do you think something bright at the end of the tunnel, or it continues for some time like this?
Well, right now I think just the end of the tunnel itself would be bright. So I think that would be lovely.
Nice.
Just to get out of the tunnel. But I don't know. I hope so. I'm cautiously optimistic. Sometimes I've read several books about plagues during this time.
Yeah.
And they always change societies. They change them in ways that are better and ways that are worse. But I think we have learned a lot of things in this pandemic about understanding and trusting science, about the need for societies to work together, the need for governments to work together, the need for people to sacrifice for the benefit of other people. And all of those things are lessons that have been denied my entire life. When I began working was in 1980, that's 40 years ago. That's when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were elected. And since then, in the Western world at least, the politics has been about a very kind of raw capitalism that did not trust government, didn't care what science said, was just about making money. And I think this crisis, because it is so global and it's affected everybody, it maybe has taught people to think in different ways. I don't know. I hope. We won't know for years, but we have to have some hope.
After the Second World War, the world has changed forever. But maybe, I hope so, after this pandemic, many things changed forever. But human behavior is still the same from what I read, from what I observed. If human behavior is not changed, nothing will be changed.
Yeah. So, there's that great line from Voltaire. He said, "History never repeats itself, but people always do."
Yeah.
And I think that's true. We look at after the Second World War, we learned to cooperate, and then we forgot again.
Yes.
Maybe after this, we will learn to cooperate again.
Interesting. Let me take you to the mentorship, your contribution in the Canadian film landscape. In 2006, you were the first official mentor at Hot Dogs Festival. In 2011, you were named Canadian Eco-Hero by the Planet in Focus Film Festival. And talking about your mentor contribution, I am your mentee, and you walk me through the Canadian film industry and landscape. You introduced me with a lot of great professionals, and you helped me to make my first Canadian film with Rhombus Media and Primitive Entertainment for CBC. It's Tzita. And it's a great experience to work with you and with your brother Michael and Christina and all the staff at Primitive. How is it begin, and why you decide to mentor young filmmakers in this challenging business?
Well, I think anybody in any profession, whatever it is, when you learn your craft, if you like your craft and you care about it, then you have a responsibility to help others learn. You know, I think that's just a natural thing. But I think particularly in our business, there's a couple of things. One is that it's a very complicated and uncertain business, as we were saying. And it's very hard to know your way in. So when I was first starting out, I had to ask people a lot of questions to try and figure out how things work and how you get money and how you make things. So, you know, I want to give back in that respect. And the other thing is that in this country, almost whatever medium you work in, the government puts a lot of money into it. You know, there's support for film, there's support for newspapers to a certain extent, certainly for radio. There's all kinds of supports. And so, you know, money comes to us from the government. So that money is from our fellow citizens. And so I feel we have a kind of a public responsibility to share the knowledge we have. So I've always felt we should share our films as widely as possible and as freely as possible. And I feel the same way about our knowledge. You know, and also it's a lot of fun. It was we had a great time making Tisita. It was fun, you know, interesting. You and I had lots of great conversations. I learned a lot. I learned about Ethiopia. I would not know hardly anything about Ethiopia except for our conversations. And I learned about your experience coming to this country and the challenges you face. So it's a two-way street. It's enriching for everybody when you share your knowledge.
Yeah, I hope still you are working with young filmmakers, upcoming filmmakers. That's a great thing to see. Whenever I came to Primitive, I see young filmmakers around you. So that makes me always, you know, to keep going. I hope after the pandemic we might have a new production. I wish to see you again in the production. And
I would love that.
Yeah, I hope so. You know, the other question I have for you, Kevin, is how different were that you originally envisioned? You know, whenever you do a certain movie, you keep the first original envision in your film at the end of the production, or you keep changing it through the process? No,
it depends on the film. So if a film is mostly about people, then you're a documentary. I mean, you know, if you're following their story, then you have to follow their story wherever it leads. But in the case of Borealis, I had a plan. I had a very strong plan. You probably saw the storyboard. It was on the bulletin board in my office for a couple of years.
Yes.
Because it's a story about the trees. So it was easy to learn what their story, it wasn't easy. I mean, I did lots of research, but I learned what their story is. Then you have to put it into a shape and then go out and find it. So in that case, the vision for the film was quite strong, and it held for almost exactly through the whole process. If I've done other films that were more, I'm following a journey of people, and so I have to go where that journey leads. So it depends.
It depends. Is there any roadblocks in the process when you make the Boreals or any Marshall McLuhan?
Well, McLuhan was much harder film to make, in at least conceptually much harder, because when Marshall McLuhan, that film is about a Canadian academic who had a lot of ideas about media and environments and technology. So the goal of that film was to to explain his ideas, but also to tell his personal story. So that was kind of complicated to weave those things together. But And in the case of Borealis, I would say the challenge was getting the money. It took almost a decade to find people who would support the film. But the actual making of the film, then when we came to make the film, because the film is telling the story of a forest over 200 years, I knew that somewhere in Canada there would be a place where the forest, there was a fire a year ago, and somewhere else there'd be a place where there was a fire 30 years ago or a century ago. And you had to find all those places so we could tell the story of how the forest grew up over the years after a fire. So the challenge was to find those places. And we went all over the country looking for those places, dealing with guides of various kinds, Indigenous people or biologists or forest experts. So I wouldn't say those were roadblocks. Those were all part of the adventure of making the movie. But that was the particular challenge with that movie.
How about working with your production crew, with the camera people, with the sound people? Is it, I think, in such difficult production, I think the challenge comes from the production crew, people around you. So was there any particular moment that you remember shooting in the forest?
Well, the most challenging moments were shooting the fire, because we had to fly. We got maybe, I think, 2 days notice to go to the Northwest Territories from Toronto because there was a forest fire. We got there, and then we had to work with Parks Canada people who were great, and got us all outfitted in fire uniforms, and then they flew us by helicopter out to where the fire was. And it was great, and it was amazing to experience, but it's also a little bit scary because, you're in a helicopter that's flying over a fire, and the fire is so strong it pushes the helicopter around. So there's things like that, but I have had the great good luck of working mostly with the same people for about 20 years. So, and we know each other very well, and we get along very well. And because we're making documentaries, we often are in rough circumstances. In this film, we were sleeping sometimes outside or in cabins or in like, not even cabins, shacks. And cold and wet and, rough travel, a lot of bugs. So all of the physical circumstances of making the film were challenging, but the crew that I work with, they're very good natured. And so we just get through it, enjoy it, and like working together. And it's always an amazing experience.
And it gives you a chance to get to know different cultures, like the First Nation people, in different parts of Canada. And tell me about your acquaintance with the First Nation people and their life and your view about the native people. I know you do a lot of things about that.
Well, I'm very, very, very lucky because my subject is the environment. It means two things. It means I have to go to the wilderness a lot. And it means that when you go to the wilderness, you encounter indigenous cultures, because in this country, about 2/3 of the land is occupied only by First Nations, or almost only by First Nations. So I've worked with Inuit a lot. I've worked with the Haida a lot. I've worked with Anishinaabe. In this film, Borealis, we were working with Cree people and Dene people. So, I've just gotten to have this fantastic experience of being able to travel in these areas and work with these people. And they're really interesting places. One of the parts of Borealis, we shot in a place called Fort Albany. Fort Albany is on the southern shore of Hudson's Bay. And I'm now reading a history of the Hudson's Bay Company. That community of Fort Albany has existed since about the middle of the 1600s. So you go to these places that seem like they're very tiny and they're, insubstantial little villages, but they've been around for a very long time. I mean, that's been a European and indigenous community for, almost 400 years. And that territory is almost untouched. So the Cree people hunt and fish. The communities that I was in Hudson's Bay, they rely on hunting and fishing for about 90% of their diet. So it's still very much alive, the culture and the way of life of those people. And it's just a great privilege to be able to experience it, because most people don't get those opportunities or don't give themselves the opportunities.
Have you ever made about First Nation people, about their life so far, or
film?
Yes,
absolutely. One of my favorite films I made. I don't know if I ever showed you. It's called Stolen Spirits of Haida Gwaii. It's about Haida Gwaii. Haida Gwaii is an island off the coast of British Columbia, up north, close to Alaska. And it's a place where in the late 19th century, they had a pandemic. They had a smallpox pandemic. And 90% of the people died. And so very few people left, crowded into these little villages. And what happened in the early 20th century is people came from museums in Europe and in the United States. Anthropologists came and they went to these old villages where people had died from the pandemic and left. And they took artifacts. They took totem poles and they took carvings. They took all this stuff because people just died and left the villages. But in those villages, in the artifacts they took, were also human bones. Bones that they where people had died and been buried in the totem poles. Yeah. So they took all this stuff and they took them to museums. So museums, as I'm sure you know, and this is true for Africa as well, museums are full of not only artifacts, but also full of human remains. So I did a movie about 10 years ago where we followed the Haida people. We followed them for about a year and a half, and they raised the money in their community to travel to Chicago and get 150 bodies of ancestors and bring them back to Haida Gwaii and rebury them. And in the process of that, they rejuvenated their culture, of course. So I made that. That was a direct collaboration with the Haida.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was great. And I made a couple of films with the Inuit as well.
And how, we're speaking of the pandemic, the smallpox, and they were very resistant to take any intervention, to take vaccine or whatever intervention because of the colonial problems. How they are doing during this pandemic? If you get a chance to go or to visit during this time.
Well, I have not had the chance to go anywhere, but my understanding is that most of Canada's Indigenous communities have done well because they just closed the doors. Yeah. I've had a film financed for more than a year to go to the Arctic and film, but we can't go because the communities just say, forget it, you're not coming here, we're not taking the chance. So they've learned their lesson, and they've in places like Nunavut or the Northwest Territories, there have been some outbreaks, mostly in northern Manitoba and in Alberta, but in the far north, they have just kept people out, and that's what saved them. So they're smart. They've learned.
And in relation with this, talking about the marginalized people in Canada or in the US or elsewhere, this month is the Black History Month, as you know. And did you get a chance to do any Black film other than Tzuta? Because Tzuta is your
Well, I wouldn't say I've done a black film, and I probably should not since I'm not a black man. But we did recently do a project that I'm very proud of, which is called Equator, A New World View, which is a 12-hour-long television series where we went around the equator talking to people about climate change and about how it's impacting their culture and their lives and their economies and their wildlife and so on. And that was a wonderful experience because, nobody that lives on the equator has white skin, wisely, because they wouldn't survive. So we did a lot of work in Africa, a lot of work in Central America and in the South Pacific. So that was wonderful. And, so that's wasn't a film directly about human rights or equal rights. But it was a film that tried to show the viewers that if you took the world and you turned it, and you looked at it from another point of view, if you privileged the view of the equator rather than the view of the poles, then you get a broader understanding of the world. So that's a film that had lots of people of color in it, and I felt really proud of.
I know. I watched the Equator. It's a great film. This person who involved in the production, and he showed his own cinema, or
the filmmaker. He's in Hollywood, they call it, in Kampala.
Oh, in Kampala, Uganda.
He's in a neighborhood in Kampala. Yeah, and he's famous. Isaac, I forget Isaac's last name at the moment, but he's quite a famous, he's the Quentin Tarantino of Africa. Oh. And they make action movies, and they do them in the old-fashioned way. They make like a movie every month. Yes. With people from the neighborhood and whatever props they can make. Yeah, they're very inspiring guys.
You include it in the production in Equator, I think. So that's really interesting. And recently, TVO showed a series about Africa, Renaissance Africa. And
I haven't seen the movie, but I saw they're showing that.
Yeah, Ethiopia was included. I think we were the first to propose about Africa, in TVO, but it didn't go through. Hopefully, one day we will make another version of African story, if the doors are open. And yes, and the other maybe so far what are your achievements about your professional journey? Did you say this is the peak time of your journey, or not yet?
I always say not yet, Kevin.
I know you do, but I want you to say it.
It's always best to look forward. So I don't know if I don't know. I mean, I can't say. I always look to the next film. I enjoy making them very much. I love the process. Yes. When the movie's over, I'm thinking about the next one.
So if you get a chance, if you were to shoot any of your film again, what would you do? I mean, differently?
Well, I bet on every single one, if I looked at it, I would find some things, some mistakes, things that I think should be better. So it's hard for me to say in a global sense because I've worked on so many films, but I think all of them, I'm sure, can use improvement. So I would probably have to look at each one of them in their details. Maybe the only thing I would say overall is that what I've tried to learn, with some success, is to enjoy the process more, to not worry when I'm doing it, to not be too concerned that, we're going to make a mistake or whatever, but just to try to enjoy the process more. And I think that's something that you just learn as you get older. At first, you're always freaked out. What if this doesn't work? What if the person doesn't show up? You know, are we working hard enough? Because when you're out shooting, you never know if you're getting enough. But but that's a different thing. As to what I would do differently, like I say, it's all little details.
And you know, when I was watching Made in Canada and Famous, I see that you are a very humorous person. You make me laugh, you know, between the scenes, and it was very humorous. And I was thinking that, you know, what if Kevin make a documentary, you know, a serious documentary, I mean comedy series, and I think you will make us laugh, you know, non-stop. So have you ever think to make a feature or a comedy?
I have often thought of that, but I have often said I would do comedy, except I'm not that smart. You know, to do comedy, you have to be really smart. And any comic I've ever met is 10 times smarter than me. Canadian Famous is funny because Eric Peterson is funny. So yeah, I would love to do that. I would actually love to make something again with Eric Peterson, and I love making funny stuff, but I'm not. I would say that it takes genius to do comedy. You know, if you're dedicated, you can make a documentary, and I suppose you can make a drama. But to make a good comedy, you need to be a genius. I'm not a genius.
You are a genius. You know. Anyway, okay. I respect your you know, humbleness, but you make me laugh, and thank you for that. And what's your film? What's your favorite film? And who is your director?
You mean what's my favorite film besides films that I've made?
Yes.
Well, I would say in documentary or in drama.
You can tell me both, but in drama, let me say drama.
Well, I would say in drama, Fellini.
Oh.
I would, if I have to choose, I would choose Fellini.
And which film of Fellini? Yeah. Which film?
Any of them. Yeah. But, you know, I would have to say probably if I had to choose, if you said you must choose now, I would choose 8.5.
8.5.
So it's just a wonderful film.
And
but,
documentary? The documentary?
You know, for documentary, there's a lot of people I like. I like Errol Morris. I think, though, the two people that influenced me the most are two guys that most people won't know. One is a guy called Frederick Wiseman, who is a great American documentary maker. He still makes films. He's in his 90s. Wow. And he made a film that recently got a lot of attention called City Hall, which was about just that. It's about Boston City Hall.
Yeah.
And he makes a very different kind of film than I do. But they're just films of people doing things. They're very quiet. He just observes people doing things. No music, no fancy shots. Yeah. But there's something about the integrity of those films that I really respect. And I've met him a couple of times, and I like him as a person. And the other guy is a guy called Peter Greenaway, who is also an old man now. He's an English filmmaker whose most of his films are drama, but I was very influenced by his early films that were documentaries. And what I was influenced with in those films is that they're very stylish, and he uses music in wonderful ways. So both those guys influenced me quite a bit. But in documentary, you know, now there's a lot of people I like. I like Michael Moore's films. You know, I could never make one. You know, I mean, there's a guy who's funny and cutting and incisive, and I respect what he does a lot. You know, it's not what I do, but I like them. So there's a lot of great filmmakers out there. It's like choosing. It's like when you have somebody, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? They're all great.
And it's very difficult to choose, I know, but sometimes there are directors or artists influence you other than that. And that's why I ask you. And before we finish, if you have anything to say, anything to add, let me give you a chance. Any person to thank. I would like to thank our friend John Sansol.
I noticed that
because he introduced me with you, because I'm so fortunate to know you. So if you have anything to say about him, still.
Well, by the way, that book that you just flashed of John Ralston Saul's, that's one of my favorite books. And that book, I would say, actually is one of the intellectual works that has definitely influenced me, because it's about being conscious as you go through the world. And that is, obviously super important for filmmakers, but it's part of what I want the films to be about. Because when I make environmental films, it's not just about pollution is bad. It's about we should look with wider eyes at our environment and understand what our environment is. So John Ralston Saul is one of the thinkers that has really influenced me in the same way, and with the same sort of idea as Marshall McLuhan. Yeah. So I'm grateful to him, and of course to more writers than I could think to name whose work has influenced my thought. I'm very grateful to my brother because he's my business partner, and he has helped get this, get all my films made. In the case of Borealis, I'm grateful to my friends at TV Ontario who have supported it, and at the National Film Board of Canada. For a long time, almost my whole career, I've worked with TVO, not on every project, but I've worked repeatedly with TVO and the NFB. And they are really great institutions for supporting documentary, and the people there are really great at understanding what documentaries are about and supporting them. So, we complain in Canada a lot about, artists particularly complain. Everybody, all Canadians complain. I don't know why we're such complainers. I think it must be because we are the luckiest people on earth, so we have to find things to complain about. But in film, we are very fortunate to have these institutions that support us. So I'm grateful for all of that, and I'm grateful for knowing you, Gazan, because we've had it's a nice friendship, and I feel really grateful to have learned a lot from you. I must say, I've only once been to Africa. As I told you, I have a sister-in-law that lives in Malawi, and my wife and I talk about this almost weekly. She comes here a lot, but we're dying to go there, and we were hoping to go there this year. COVID has stopped that. But I'm very eager to go soon, because it's such an amazing continent with so many amazing cultures.
I wish I would take you and walk you through that marvelous country, Ethiopia. Hopefully we will visit together once.
I hope.
Yeah. But thank you very much for your time, for your, great conversation on our virtual conversation. And I wish you all the best where you are. It's a very interesting place to be at this time. So I wish you all the best. Pass my regards to the family.
I will. Same to you. Thank you so much, and great luck with the show. It's fabulous what you're doing, and I'm very excited by it, and I think it's wonderful. So I hope you're very proud of all your small but growing media empire there. It's very impressive.
Thank you for subscribing, sharing, and your comment. That's all we have for today. See you next time.